Venetia is a wildlife researcher working with the Frontier Elephants program at FERIL. That is the Foundation for Ecological Research, Advocacy and Learning. And she works with elephants and communities who share spaces and resources. When Vena is not coercing people to go on insect and spider crawls, she heads the nature classrooms programs at NCF, which is very interesting because they work with primary school teachers and they are trying to build learning modules and curriculum where they look at the surrounding environment and look how they can incorporate that into the curriculum in age-appropriate manner. And Chetana is a biologist and a marine educator. She began diving in the Andaman Islands to study coral reefs after the 2010 mass bleaching episode. And she ended up staying there for 8 years as an instructor in a diving school. And now she works to excite people about the magic of oceans through immersive learning programs. And she is one of the founders of a nature education enterprise called Spiders and the Sea. I would really encourage you all to look up their work. It's very exciting and interesting. And I invite all three of them on stage.
Yes, so I think we would all like to know about what motivated you all get into this field.
So the current work that I'm doing is on nature education, and I believe passionately that we are so removed from everyday nature, given that the way our cities are built, given that we live in such concrete kind of surroundings, and nature always seems to be far off. It seems to be that we have to go to forests to be able to see it. All of us who are in the ecology and wildlife discipline will tell you that even if you look at the corners of the ceilings outside this room, you would find all sorts of creatures inhabiting these spaces. And we often don't realize that actually we see nature and we can actually engage with nature very close to us. So I started my work, I studied undergraduation in Chennai, in commerce, and then I realized that I wanted to really work in the field of wildlife and conservation. Like a lot of people, like a lot of us who are in this field, I thought I'll get into animal welfare. I wanted to be a veterinary doctor. And all my experiences with wildlife and conservation were through magazines and through documentaries that I was seeing in Doordarshan. I started meeting a lot of people and then I realized that there are actually people in India doing the work, and so I could actually get into it. But being from a non-science background, it was very difficult for me to get into a master's program, and there was only one college in Pondicherry that allowed me to get into a ecology master's program. That kind of opened up a lot of avenues for me. And I worked in various fields after that. I started my work looking at spiders and using spiders as biocontrol agents in agricultural fields in an organization in Chennai. I then used that kind of knowledge that I acquired in that organization to look at using spiders in the rainforest restoration work that we were doing in Valpare in the Western Ghats. And I was there for 4 years. I did various things in between, all in the field of nature conservation and wildlife conservation. And right now, I'm currently, because there's a common thread of education through my work, and I passionately believe that we can really change people's perception of nature and connecting with nature just by showing them the wonders and the delights and the excitement of what nature can bring into our world and into our work.
Listening to your story, I think we share a lot of the same milestones. I don't think there was any one moment that helped me realize what I wanted to do, and honestly, no 2 years have been really the same. The larger theme has been wanting to work with wildlife. When I was much younger, I think when I was in high school, I wanted to work with animals. I thought I would start an animal shelter. I then thought I would be a veterinarian. That was only because I thought those are the things you could do if you were interested in animals. We had a dog, and I thought, the best way to, earn a living and, let your career be about animals was this, because wildlife was something that you see on documentaries, and that would just be, tracking them, following them, handling them, and it was never really something you'd see in India as well. But I think growing up, right place at the right time, I managed to bump into researchers conservationists, and I realized that you could actually do a master's degree in wildlife biology. And so that was the journey that I ended up taking. So working with wildlife through research and academics. That didn't last very long, but I used the knowledge and the skills that we were trained in and moved slowly into the education space. And that happened while I was in the Andamans. I was there to do my fieldwork, research on corals and how they're recovering from warming and bleaching, which has happened quite significantly in India. But in the process, I would go on boats, which were actually dive school boats. So 5 out of the 6 people in that boat would be tourists who've come to learn how to dive, or they're already certified divers and they want to see what's there in the Andamans. And I would get to talking to them a lot, and I would realize that even for someone who's dived a lot, they didn't actually understand a lot of what they're seeing. Sometimes something as simple as, is that coral or is that algae? And they were really happy to know more, and I realized that that's actually what I want to focus on. And being in the Andamans is a perfect place where it's this one small place that everyone from around India and the world comes. So I felt that was an amazing opportunity for me to introduce marine education, and not with PowerPoints or films, where I could actually go, teach underwater. So that was really a lot of fun, and that's why I actually learned more about marine biology than when I was working as a biologist, because I was only then looking at corals, and literally underwater you have no more time than that when you have a tank of air. So with Spiders in the Sea now, the name is because of the pet interests of the two of us, the founders. But the idea there is also to think of the wildlife and environment that is far away from us, that we may not necessarily see every day, but we necessarily connect and depend on. But there is also the wildlife that lives in our homes, on our streets. And that's something that we have explored a lot through the pandemic, and that's how we've been able to connect with people. Just go to the bathroom, what do you find in the corner? So that's a nutshell.
Also, would you like to talk about how, if being a woman has sort of affected the path that you have taken?
I think it depends on the time in which part of my career I was in. So yes, through my 20s, I don't think I thought too much about gender, and I think I may have been biased in a lot of things that I was doing, in the way I was interacting with people. And typically you would have, white male scientists who you would read, or you would listen to lectures of, or even if you think of a excellent wildlife biologist, a white male scientist would come to your mind. And so that, of course, has changed over the years, because you learn to read much more. You interact with other people who have different points of views. So currently the work I'm doing, I think, comes a little bit from working very closely with school teachers and educators. Most of them are women. And so I think that I'm able to relate to them through empathy. Also because they're women, I understand the kind of various roles they're playing in their life, right? And so many of us go into school spaces because we believe that that a change needs to happen in a school system, right? We believe that we are passionate about nature education and about wildlife conservation, and so we should be able to pass on that passion. But we also fail to take into account that school systems are places where everybody wants to try and make a change, and therefore there's an additional responsibility on the school teacher to do that. And so we also know that the school teacher is a woman. She goes back. She has to deal with her home problems. She's taking care of her children. She's cooking all 3 meals, etc. And so a lot of the way we design our interventions in school spaces is keeping this in mind. And so the way we design our nature education modules is to try and weave it into the current subject and curriculum they have to anyway teach. So we're not going, outside of the school hours and saying, do this, do that, and therefore this is good for your school. But since you're doing this, how can you make it more relevant so that the child gets excited about nature and you yourself get excited about nature? One kind of anecdote I'd like to share is that early on, we work mostly with school teachers. We don't work directly with children because we think it's much more sustainable to work with teachers in the long run. We very early in our work realized that we needed to take these teachers out of their school system for some time, give them a break. So we would take them on these nature immersion workshops a little away from Bangalore city so that they're not bombarded by everyday school happenings and children running to them saying miss, miss, miss and things like that. They would often be reluctant, but we would force them to take that half day off, whisk them away. And often it became a very emotional experience for these teachers because they're not used to being listened to by somebody else. They're not used to listening to their concerns, to asking them to dream about what they think a curriculum should look like for the child, asking them what they felt when they were growing up as a child and how they connected with nature, and then asking them to compare that with how the children they're teaching now is engaging with nature. And then they realized saying that, as a child, we used to walk, we used to see trees, we used to, walk to school, we used to see so many things on the way. Children these days don't have that luxury. And so we bring in concepts like shifting baseline syndrome, nature deficit syndrome, things that many of us in our discipline talk about. And so then we get them to dream about what they think should be an ideal nature learning curriculum. Just that little bit of an intervention with them in the beginning makes them allies in our cause. And so I think as a woman that really helps because many of us then empathize with them and the work that they do. The education sector is full of women, be it teachers, be it the people starting organizations. It's one of the disciplines that has the most number of women. But if you look at any of the kind of leadership positions or any policy decisions that are taken, it's you'll mostly see men being taking those decisions. And so we need to have a push for more visibility and for leadership being kind of almost not forced on them, but recognize that they are the ones who need to be up there in the forefront because they are the ones actually doing the work. And so there is a difference in that way. I mean, look at our recent education policy that came out. The panel was full of men. There was one woman among 15 men or something like that. And when it was pointed out, nobody wanted to answer that question. And so I might come across as angry feminist, but I think we need more angry feminists, yeah.
For sure, because I think a lot of people don't recognize that change in perspective that having more women maybe on a panel would make.
Specifically with Spiders in the Sea, we're fairly new. We started in the pandemic. And as such, what I can say is just in terms of participation, we teach children as well as adults, and with adults we do find actually more women participate, whether it's signing up for a virtual program or with the walks that we do. So I don't know what that pattern says essentially, but contrasting to Vena's experience, I would say that for a very long time I would not remember that, I'm a woman, or only much later, in hindsight, I realized that a lot of my professors were male. But my entire generation, we had a pretty good representation. So I think in the generation, in the next decade or so, we are going to see that shift. And again, I don't know if I was making these decisions subconsciously, but I was choosing environments to work in where we had very supportive people at high levels. Our manager at Dive India, the dive school I worked with all these years, was Melissa, and she was such a phenomenal role model. And even up until then, working in environments where everyone was very respectful to each other, or it was very easy to have a conversation. And so in that sense, I've been very, very lucky through all of these years. And so hopefully through these organizations, those are the things I'm going to keep in mind going forward.
As a program in the Nature Conservation Foundation that I'm part of, our program is one of the only programs that has a number of women, right? And I think maybe because our program is called Education and Public Engagement. Usually you have, because it's seen as a soft kind of a skill set, right? And so you have more women part of it. Things like, for example, many of my colleagues are bird watchers, and they also take people and encourage everyone to, they train people in bird watching and things like that. So we take people for bird walks. And after some time, many of my women colleagues started noticing a pattern saying that, women come, bird watchers are there. Again, it's a very elite crowd of women who come, very few of them. Most of them are, men. Why is that? And so we started realizing because bird watching is early morning. And so if a woman doesn't have access to a private vehicle, she finds it very difficult to come to these sometimes very remote areas. And so unless she had, a group of people who had access to a car, or she had other male friends who would take her, she couldn't come. Or it was very difficult for younger women to convince, if they're still living with their parents, to allow them to go at such odd hours, because bird watching needs to be done early morning. And so we realized that, and then also gathering for meetings when you're talking about citizen science efforts and how data can be kind of, can feed into science. Very few women would be there in those spaces. And so we realized that we needed to make these areas much more women-friendly. We needed to start thinking seriously about times when we had these meetings. We had to think about how we could arrange for transport if that was what was stopping women. If we had to even talk to guardians and parents about it. So I don't think, I'd like to be challenged on that, but I don't think a male colleague would have thought about that at all.
When I am on field, sometimes I forget my gender because that's not something I really think about. And I'm really lucky to be in a group of with a group of people who I don't have to worry about this with. But I think there are a lot of things that come up now and then that I realize that my male colleagues don't really think about. Like, for example, something as basic as having access to a bathroom. For a man, I don't think it's as big a problem, or they don't really think about it as much as a woman would. And then it comes down to bigger things like opportunities. Sometimes when a big project or something important comes up, usually a person first look at a male colleague to take that up, because for some reason they feel like they're more capable of doing that, which luckily for me I haven't experienced while working with elephants. But I know that this is something that a lot of people go through. And also while talking to officials sometimes, you sometimes get overlooked just because you're a woman. And that I think is there in a lot of places, and it is changing. Not everyone is like this, and I see that change is happening, and a lot. And at least I think working in southern India, you don't really see that much of a drastic difference in a way a woman or a man is treated, but in other place there is.
I think that what you just said definitely, I think, was the experience for me as well. Not realizing that, say, before I went to the Andamans, I did work on a project looking at bird song. So that would mean we would go to remote high elevation places in Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka. So whether it's Munnar or it's Agastya Malai, so we would actually we'd be camping on the top for, say, 15 days. So you'd have to carry a lot of your rations and clothes. And so I do remember that every time we would begin, we would, say, have a new set of forest watchers, or our field assistants were the same. But there would be this initial 1 day or half day. So everyone starts with, I don't think she can do it, or, it's going to be a burden. And I've always managed to do it, but I knew that it would probably start with them wondering if I could. And once I've sort of passed that test, we're all equal and, everything's fine. So, and I think that is something that is just by default that we were so used to.
Or sometimes I've also faced this, that if you're the only woman in a group, often people come and dump their problems on you because you're seen as a person who will empathize and sympathize. And of course, as you know, as our nature is and how society expects us to be, you will say, oh, I'm really sorry, and you'll listen, and etc. And often academic and research questions are not, at the same time, not, brought, those questions are not brought to you. It's given to the male counterpart. And so sometimes you have to fight to say that, I can also, respond to the research questions and not just to your personal problems. this is not to say that we should change our ways as women and be more masculine in our traits, not at all. I think we should cherish that, and we should be proud of that, but also make it normalize that men also should do that, right? And they should also be empathetic listeners. They should also be sensitive and show their emotions, etc. And that it should be gender neutral.
Both of you have been doing research and have been involved in the academic side of things a bit, and you're still doing quite a bit of that. And then you moved on to education. Can you tell us a bit about why that shift happened? And also another question I had was, so a lot of times throughout these last couple of days, we have been talking about also having to fight for nature, having to fight to save the environment. So can you give your perspective on how academics and research can strengthen that fight instead of being in a sort of adversarial position that we sometimes see?
I still do a bit of research, but it's not my the main work that I do. I do research in order to inform the work that I'm doing as part of education and outreach. And so I have students who, try and, because I can't do the research myself right now. So this shift happened because I think the way the academics is set up didn't seem appealing to me at that point. So I did my master's in ecology, and then I did an MPhil in conservation leadership after 10 years. And so that was very interesting for me, but I haven't shut out the idea of doing a PhD. Maybe I'll do it at some point. I don't know. But I think that research training and thinking for me was more than enough for the work that I'm doing currently. I think with getting too much into a research stream kind of puts you in a silo because of the way things are also designed now. So you tend to specialize more and more and more and more, and that may be good for some people. It didn't appeal to me, and I don't think it would have helped me with my current work that I'm passionate about and I really believe in. Research informs us. Just to give you an example about how species are disappearing, how animals that we barely know anything about are just disappearing simply because of habitat change, because of pollution, or because we just don't know what's going on. We don't know what most of the life forms are around us. We tend to still concentrate on the large charismatic animals. I think we've sampled maybe 5% of the insect and spider life that we have and they constitute so much of the biodiversity. We don't even know the roles they are playing to keep ecosystems functioning. So research is important, but we just don't have enough funds to keep people from doing the research that needs to be done. And I think the emphasis on publishing and just the bureaucracy of being in an education institution just pulls a lot of people down. But the organization I'm part of, our work is steeped in research. So only after we do research and understand a particular geographical location, we work with the communities in order to come up with conservation intervention that we suggest to them. So we always work in close collaboration with the people in those landscapes. But research very much informs what needs to be done as well. Yeah.
To answer your first question about how and why I moved into education, I think there were a bunch of different factors that were sort of working together. One was at the time that I was starting off as a wildlife biologist, working with scientists, but as well as doing my master's in the early 2010s. It was all very real. You're studying about case studies in different parts of India. We would do field trips. And honestly, it became a bit too much. And now we know there's a term for it, ecological grief. And it was sort of crippling. I was like, what is the point of any of it that I'm doing right now? If anyway, everything is basically getting destroyed. And simultaneously, I felt that I don't think I would have made a very good researcher when it came to academics with the kind of research projects, because I realized that I should have spent most time studying math. And that's a very important part of even studying biology and doing field ecological research. But I realized that I actually would make a much better educator. And I feel I'm doing a bit more to address that sort of crippling grief that I had. And the results are not immediate. It may not change a policy today or tomorrow. But I feel the amount of time that I'm investing in changing mindsets. And I believe in working with children as well as adults, children in slightly more sort of elite schools, as well as children who go to schools that are maybe not as well off, where not everyone is going to be able to take you on a field trip to the Andamans. So trying to reach as many people as possible. And one of the things that we want to do through Spiders in the Sea is definitely research is very important. And we realize that that itself takes so much time, and they may not necessarily have the skills or the time or the interest to be able to pass on that information to everyone else. And this huge group of people who want to know more. And these are people in all walks of life. Not everyone needs to become a biologist to appreciate nature. And there's this huge gap in the middle. So we want to be that bridge. So take research to the people, as well as with citizen science being an opportunity for everyone to be a part of research and contribute to the science that we need today. And one such project is where we are working with Know Your Fish, which basically is, they work on responsible seafood, where they feel that a way to address overfishing and the crisis that we have in the oceans because of the disappearing populations of marine life is, on one hand, yes, the government has to come up with more stricter policies, and fishing communities have to be more responsible with the kinds of nets and methods they use, but as consumers, we actually drive that demand. But not everyone is going to know what fish breeds in which time of the month, and they don't have the time to do that research. So Know Your Fish essentially has created this calendar for India. So no matter which month you're in, you just go look at which fish they say you need to avoid because it's breeding right now, and which one is a better alternative. And that's working really well, but it's still only restricted to a small section of people. So we are trying to help them expand their reach, make their calendar and resources available in vernacular languages. We're looking at Kannada, Malayalam, West Coast languages to begin with, starting from Gujarat. And just going to someone and saying, don't eat this now, they're breeding right now, may not actually mean anything, because they, fish perhaps is just seafood. You don't actually realize it's a wild animal. It's part of an ecosystem before it gets on your plate. So that's my job, to try and sort of build that context. And even if you don't necessarily, agree with, responsible seafood, sort of sowed the seed of, thinking about ecology in your daily life.
So for me, what drives me is my love for observing things, I guess. I like to watch and learn, which is a large part of what my work entails. So I work with elephants, and elephants who live in human-dominated areas around a lot of people. So a lot of what research we do is watching these elephants and learning about how they learn to live alongside people. And at the same time, we also work with communities to sort of encourage people to share spaces with them, encourage people to share resources. And in a lot of these communities, it's actually quite easy because these things are already instilled in them. Historically, they have lived alongside elephants. But in a lot of newer areas where elephants have now started to move into, this is not something that people are used to. And in these places, it's quite challenging. So a lot of what I do isn't purely science. It's also a lot of community work. And that's where education is so important. And it's really nice to see that the things we learn about elephants by watching them, by understanding their biology, understanding their needs, and how that translates into sort of bringing awareness to these communities and explain to them why these elephants are visiting their villages, which they weren't in the past. I think it becomes a lot more exciting, and for me that's the exciting bit, to watch these communities, change their mindsets towards these animals from conflict to a sort of coexistence. With the communities that I work with, what they're experiencing is conflict with wild elephants because these elephants come into their crop fields to eat. So how do we sort of offset that loss is one thing that we thought about. But then when we actually sat down with these communities and spoke to them, we realized that they really do want to live with these animals. The only thing that comes into play is they also need to feed their families. So we figured that if we could help them protect their crop and maybe find better markets at which they could sell their crop, would make all the difference. And that would reduce the aggression that these people have towards the elephant itself, and also that they have towards the government officials who are in charge of protecting elephants and other wild animals. It's interesting because we didn't approach it from a purely ecological mindset. It was done through the use of markets, which became really important. How these crops could be sold at a price where the person can basically offset the cost of loss, and also come up with ways that they could protect their crop without. Which is low cost without harming elephants, and this was done with the community, where the community also sort of, we worked with communities to find ways to do so. And other very interesting thing that sort of came up was how interested these people were with the elephants. Because we are elephant biologists, we don't look at elephants as elephants, we look at elephants as individuals. So the people from these communities also started to recognize elephants as individuals who are coming to their village, who share the space, and it's spaces that belong to the elephants as well. This is slightly different in areas closer to the cities, in peri-urban areas, where people don't have the experience of living alongside elephants in the past, where this still has to sink in, and that's something we are working towards.
I think as a community, what we often tend to do is talk about the problems of the environment, right? Climate change, forest destruction. It can be very crippling, just like how Chetana said. Ecological grief is very real, and especially to put that burden on children is extremely unfair, and so the work that we do, and because we work with teachers who then teach young children, is to get them to feel a sense of wonder and excitement about the natural world. And we really believe that that's the way to start, to discover the joys of nature, about the stories of the animals and plants that surround them. We are lacking in natural history stories, right? The wonderful story about the fig wasp and the fig tree. And there are so many things around us happening. And as we learn about them, we're always amazed, saying, why didn't we learn about this in school? Why am I learning about this so late? And teachers are constantly telling us this. What is the association between a bee and a flower, and what is going outside the textbook example of, how a butterfly is, comes alive. But often we don't show it to them in real life, and we can see those examples in our backyard. And so we start with this feeling of wonder, adventure, excitement, connect. And then once they feel that, and they feel this sense of responsibility and love for nature, then you can bring in the element when they're much older, saying that, and why would they want to protect something that they don't love or feel a connection to, right? And so a lot of us in the education field really believe that this is the way to start, instead of constantly only talking about climate change and grief and destruction. Yes, it's something that's happening. We should not ignore it, but let's address it after we go through these other kind of emotions.
When we were talking to these people, we realized that when they started listening to stories about these elephants and looking at these elephants that are using their spaces, because we do a lot of camera tapping work and we show these pictures to communities as well. They were so excited. Which is the name of our project itself. It's my elephant. This is my elephant and comes to my village. So it's so much excitement that is generated.
And so we use the term nature learning in our work because it's about learning and not, education comes much later. And I think continue, please explore your surroundings. You'll see a rich array of nature around you.
My question to all three of you is like you all started off as like very traditionally trained ecologists, which I think I also was at one point, and then now you transitioned into like sort of an interdisciplinary space and education. So what was like your biggest challenge as a traditionally trained ecologist, especially in India, and then transitioning to an interdisciplinary space and doing what you do right now, which is education?
So I guess part of it is a challenge and part of it was actually helped me in that there's hardly anyone, very few marine biologists in India to begin with. Very few people doing field marine ecology, very few places that you can actually go do this kind of research. So a lot of what I was doing was new, so there weren't too many people that I could talk to about it. But at the same time, when I did shift to education, I feel like I was able, the things that I was doing and exploring for the first time are things that people are adopting. And so in that sense, it was easier to make this transition. While I was actually working as a researcher, one of the biggest challenges was, I would say, raising money. In this space, it's a lot easier. So in many ways, it's been smoother as a transition than actually staying as a full-time researcher.
So I think when I was younger, it was much more difficult to be taken seriously as a person. And right now, currently, the role I am in, and for my age, all my colleagues and peers have PhDs. So I'm one of the very few people in my organization who doesn't have a PhD. And so it still is difficult to be taken seriously. Often, again, when it comes to academic questions or research questions, it's often not directed to me. But I think because I'm older now, I really don't care. I'm in that stage in my career where I've created my own path. I have much more confidence than I had as a 20-year-old and a 30-year-old. I'm now in my 40s. So I really feel like put your head down, don't take nonsense and bullshit from people. Allow for your colleagues to collaborate with you as much as possible. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to sound like an old, wretched woman who's, been wronged, but yeah, your life experiences kind of help you navigate that path. I've been fairly, again, privileged, like all of us here are, where my family has supported me in my decisions. Financially, it's always a struggle in this field. And so often we find that as we get higher up in our roles and careers, the on-ground work that we do often takes a backseat because you're now responsible for raising funds for your projects. You're responsible for your colleague, for raising funds for your own salary and for your colleague's salary. And so you tend to get into that loop. So that's always a bit of a challenge. But having an ecology kind of outlook has helped me in the current work that I do. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you so much, all three of you.